No More National Debt, Bill Still, world's first interactive book. And it's got scans that you can do that pull up videos and news articles and documents throughout the already thick book. You want to understand why your oil prices are going up? You want to understand dollar devaluation? You want to understand the monetarist and what they're doing? It's all in. No More National Debt, Bill Still. Excellent new book that he's written, available at Infowars.com. Bill, we're going to break here in a few minutes, and we'll recap when we come back. But here's the headlines. IMF bombshell. Age of America nears end. We'll cover some more of those headlines when we come back. But it's really happening. The wages of letting this cartel run things are here. And in your film, The Money Masters, put out 15 years ago, you traveled the world. You went to the National Archives. And I want to go through some of those quotes. I didn't give you a heads up, so maybe during the break you can dig them up. And the experts you interviewed, the Depression wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was engineered. So I want to talk about the system we're under so people then understand the system that your research shows we should move to. Good to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on again.
We're really coming to the edge here with the dollar. Briefly, in the 2 minutes we've got left, we'll come back and get into the full body of the interview. Are we at the precipice right now?
Well, yeah, but we don't need to be there. We just don't need a system where we have to incur a national debt. The thing that people don't realize, even Paul Ryan, head of the House Budget Committee, will say inane stuff on TV, like what we need to do is just cut the budget deficit and thereby reduce the national debt. It ain't going to happen. You can't reduce the national debt. To reduce the national debt reduces the national money. No, the only way to fix this, the only way, is to get out of the Federal Reserve box, to get out of the debt money system. That's our only hope.
Well, you're absolutely right. And so when we come back, if you've got time, grab some of those quotes that are on record. Let's describe the system we're under, what their goal is, their admission that they want to destroy free market, destroy wealth. It's this false crony, Madoff, Kinlay type banker system that seeks to consolidate all power and control versus the system that our forebears set up. And there's a debate here between kind of the Ron Paul model, the gold silverback, versus the Lincoln greenback model. And again, we'll get to that at the bottom of the hour. The first two segments, the long ones coming up, Bill, I want to really give you the floor because people need to understand what's happening currently by knowing the past, to give us a history lesson, to go over who these people are, and the breakdown of the same families that engineered our Great Depression, because I know your research, I'm not putting words in your mouth, are the ones engineering what's happening today. And I think it's a little more than just ignorance with Paul Ryan. They're trying to sell us on the austerity of gutting everything to transfer all wealth to the bankers instead of cutting off the bankers and turning loose the power of true interest-free credit, basically, to the general public. Bill Still is our guest. The book available at Infowars.com. It needs to get out there to every maker, author, researcher. Bill Still is our guest. I cannot impress on you enough that we're in a war against the globalists, the private banking cartel that sets up currency Ponzi schemes that are issued and controlled by private interest. And as Thomas Jefferson said, if we ever allow private banks to control the issuance of currency and credit, we will, our children will wake up homeless on the continent our forefathers conquered. He went on to say, banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies. In fact, we're about to go to Bill Still, but pull that quote up for me, the full Jefferson that I keep quoting. If you just search Thomas Jefferson, banks are more dangerous than standing armies, it'll pull that quote up. The general public knows gas prices are going up, but they don't know why. Dollar devaluation. And they don't know who's behind it. The Republicans are scapegoating the welfare people. The welfare people are being scapegoated by the banksters against the middle class. If you don't get rid of the banking cartel and the fractional reserve banking, nothing will be fixed. And we're going to go over the mathematics of that, the history of that, who these cartels are. This is premeditated. Here are the headlines just in the last few days. IMF bombshell, age of America nears end. The globalists have moved everything to China, set up trade deals that are unfair because they've moved there. China is talking about dumping their purchases by 2/3 of U.S. Treasury bills, right as the Fed says they may not go to QE3, monetization of debt. This is the information that is coming out. And we also have the headlines today that the Swiss franc is at all-time record highs against the dollar. Gold and silver surging in prices. Again, dollar tumbles to all-time low versus Swiss franc. Geithner defends strong dollar policy. Fed approaches crossroads as growth slows. Wealthy leaving Vegas mansions as foreclosure pain spreads. And I'm telling you, if you cut off the welfare moms, I'm not for having them dependent, but at least some of the money they're given of taxpayers gets put back into the economy. The banksters, they use it to buy up capital items. They use it to consolidate. And his new book, Bill Still, No More National Debt, that breaks all this down, is an interactive book. He'll tell you about that later in the hour. It's all available at Infowars.com, along with his films, the newest, The Secret of Oz, and The Money Masters. These are the key tools. I've been using Money Masters for 15 years to wake up people, to show them the history, to understand what's unfolding. And now polls show over 80% want to audit or abolish the Fed. So folks are getting past the puppet politicians and to the real illegitimate power behind the throne. Bill Still, you've got the floor. Break down the history, the premeditation, what we're facing, what we're entering right now, then we'll get into solutions.
Well, first of all, auditing the Fed is not going to do any good, because if the Fed disappeared tomorrow, absolutely nothing would change. It's not the Fed. It's the commercial banks, which the Fed pretends to regulate, when in fact the Fed does nothing but cover for the commercial banks. It's disguised to look like part of the government, so we will think that the government is regulating the banks, when in fact just the reverse is true.
It's the policy holding company. It's the policy holding company.
The Fed is just covering for the banks. That's why the deception of calling it the Federal Reserve System, to make people think it's part of the government. When I was doing the Money Masters, the first person I sent the first cut of it to was Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist. And I was surprised that he even would look at it, but he did. And I'll never forget when he called back after he'd seen it the first time, this is what he said. He said, "Boy, if you kill the Fed and don't do anything about fractional reserve lending, you've done nothing." And, you know, it kind of shocked me. And so we had to rejigger the edit on the Money Masters, because he really understood it to a much greater depth. I was much more, let's kill the Fed and all that kind of stuff. But you have to understand, it's not the Fed. It's the commercial banks behind the Fed and their fractional reserve lending system that we've got to fix. If we do those two things, we eliminate the ability of commercial banks to lend money they don't have, which is called fractional reserve lending, and number two, eliminate the ability of the federal government to borrow, then we fix this, we're free of them forever, and we can finally have a sovereign, free nation once again, with that very minimum, the total elimination of income taxes. So I think that's a pretty good payoff, and all we have to do, the only thing we have to do to control it, is to control the quantity of money that's issued. That's all we have to do. Now, that might be easier said than done, but you know what? Controlling the quantity of money, or the quantity of money debt-free getting out of control, is one heck of a lot better than what we've got today, the quantity of money being out of control when it's being borrowed. So that's the basic situation. Now, you said, why are they after us? Well, they're after us because America still is the freest nation in history. It is the only nation that repeatedly and throughout its history has opposed the central bankers' scam. And they know that we are the great danger to not only them and their this massive influx of the way they're able to centralize world money, but to the entire New World Order scheme. They know America is the target. They know they've got to try to take down America. And this is still up for grabs. It's still up for grabs whether or not humanity can successfully rule itself. That is the basic question that's at risk right now. Are we able to self-govern, or do we slip back into serfdom where the rich guys of the world control absolutely everything? That's what's at risk, and that's what InfoWars is doing such a great job at.
And they control it through fraud. So let's start at the beginning, a brief history of money, what the money changers do, the program they're carrying out. Republicans will say, what's wrong with rich guys? These aren't rich guys that invented a computer or a widget or a video game or who know how to hit a baseball. They do this through fraud, and they've always used booms and bust to consolidate power. Break it down.
Well, that's exactly right. This is the rich guys club of the world attempting to monopolize all the money and thereby monopolize the political power as well. That's the problem when a nation borrows its money into existence. It's not just the interest on the debt. For example, last year we spent $204 billion just paying interest on the national debt, something that is entirely unnecessary. We don't have to do it. We don't have to have a system constructed that way. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, even by their conservative estimates, by 2020, the amount of money we will be paying just on interest on this totally unnecessary national debt is $1 trillion. That is entirely and completely unsustainable. We won't get to 2020 with that in that type of situation. Something is going to happen before then. So there's a crossroads coming up. We can either continue down their system, and their solution that will be offered will be an international currency after another complete collapse of the American economy, backed by gold, the gold-backed money thing. That'll be the decision point. Or we can go to a debt-free money issued by our own elected government. That's the decision point we're coming up headlong on, and that's why we've got to try to get the word out. Now,
okay, Bill, I want to get into some of the history of this and what happened in the Great Depression and what you see currently in the economic climate, but you mentioned something about 5 minutes ago that I want listeners to know is not pie in the sky. You said we can get rid of the income tax. We didn't have the income tax, for those that don't know, until the same year we got the private banking front company of the Federal Reserve in place. It's part of the Communist Manifesto. The bankers actually want collectivism for the general public to transfer our wealth. We built the nation without the income tax, and the income tax does not go to run this country. So explain that to people.
Well, absolutely. That's why it was used to back up the massive new debt that they knew the government was going to accumulate with the institution of the Federal Reserve Act. And it's just absolutely unnecessary. This country was built on tariffs and excise taxes alone. That's sufficient income for the nation. And you don't need a national federal income tax. So you can get rid of both in one fell swoop. Now, you mentioned something interesting about China. The only trick, what you're going to see here, make no mistake about it, we are moving into a hyperinflationary period. There's absolutely no question about it. You're seeing it in commodities and gas prices right now. You're going to see it across the board in price hikes and everything by the end of this year. And so because the central bankers only have one trick up their sleeve. All they can do is to devalue the individual national monies by printing more of it, by actually lending more of it. See, I made the same mistake. So where does all that extra money go? It continues to flood into China. So what did we see just a couple weeks ago when China raised its interest rates for the fourth time since October? It's because their annualized inflation rate at this point is 60. That's 60% per year. China doesn't do very well under their current system in that type of inflationary environment, because the folks on the East Coast who still have jobs can still barely make it. But when you double and triple basic foodstuffs for the peasants on the inland, you're going to get social unrest, and that's what China fears more than anything else. But there's nothing they can do, because all the other Western economies are inflating their currencies pretty much on an equal basis, and all that extra money.
Well, absolutely. Look at our mainstream pro-globalist media. They tell us China is Valhalla. Steve Watson's brother, Paul Watson, was just, one of our writers, was just over in China for 2 weeks. An unmitigated hellhole in the cities he was in, homeless people everywhere, feces on the ground, riots going on daily, troops marching in the streets. And we're told China is this wondrous model of the New World Order. That shows how our media is lying to us.
Well, absolutely. I mean, China is going to suffer unrest because of this massive inflation, but they have no alternative. They have no other way to go other than to hyperinflate all currencies. Now, the Swiss currency and the Canadian currency and the Australian currency are less prone to that, so that's why you're seeing them change in relation to the value of the dollar.
That's right. Bill Still, stay there. As Bob Chapman said, he recommended both those currencies years ago. Okay, going back to Bill Still of the Money Masters, the Secret of Oz films, both available at Infowars.com. I hope you get them and get them out to everybody you know so they understand what we're facing. And the new book, No More National Debt. Now, I want to go back to the Great Depression. We'll get into the new book and solutions coming up to what really happened there. Because if you research the history of it, it's on record the big central banks maneuvered to actually crash the market and then get people on Social Security so they'd be tied into the Ponzi scheme and go along with the expansion of the domestication. And now we're headed into the next phase of getting rid of the free market, imploding America, blaming capitalism, and moving towards a total hegemonic system run by the very same private banks at a world level.
It back at the occasion of Milton Friedman's 90th birthday, which a piece that ran on NPR, because Friedman researched it and found out that the cause of the Great Depression was because the newly formed Federal Reserve System, which was supposed to prevent such depressions, deliberately contracted the amount of money in circulation by a factor of 1/3, and then held that money out of circulation, and that was the cause of the Great Depression. Depression on the national level is just like a depression in your own personal level. If you don't have money in your wallet, it's a depression. It's the same thing. If they increase the amount of money in circulation, like they did through the early the last 2000 through 2008, for example, then you have boom times and house prices zoom skyward, and all they have to do is contract the currency a little bit, and the economy turns back down. And of course, they're fully prepared to financially gain from that sort of thing, and they do. They buy up assets for pennies on the dollar. This is something throughout the history of the United States they've done no less than half a dozen times, if not 10 times, time and time again, milking the economy, milking the wealth, asset stripping the American people. But, you know, fortunately, we still have the system we have in place. This system can still survive.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment, but going back to the authors of the crimes that we're now witnessing and all this pain, this time it was different than the Great Depression, though. They first gave themselves tens of trillions of fiat, digital dollars that they hoarded and then loaned out at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, some credit card APRs, and we'll put the CNN headline up, 79.9 now. So that bailout, they admit they even restricted money more in the last 2.5 years, hoarding it for themselves as they got the country deeper in debt so that when everything finally goes under, they're going to come in flush with cash as the saviors like carpetbaggers with off-the-chart interest rates.
Well, it was worse than that. I mean, we found out in the congressional hearings after the 2008 debacle that J.P. Morgan and Citi were lending out 52 times the amount of money they had, not just the 10 to 12 times allowed by international banking rules, but 52 times. Freddie and Fannie were leveraged out 72 times, and Goldman Sachs was leveraged out 333 times. And then about 4 months ago, Obama got on TV and said, we need to just end the reserve requirement altogether. In other words, 333 times is not sufficient for these bankers. Only infinity will do. And that's the kind of system we have right now, where there's a group of people that can essentially print money in their own bank electronically, lend it out to us at interest if they want, or in this particular case, now they can print this money out and play in the derivatives market where they can make far more profits than they can at lending us fixed mortgages for 30 years.
It makes loan sharking look like a moral operation, and these very same banking cartels, J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they're the big six, quote, U.S. holders of the private Federal Reserve stock. You got the Bank of England and others involved, and they keep that secret very tightly held. I mean, since when do we have a private group who Congress can't even find out secrets from, running roughshod over everything. And 2 years ago, Greenspan, former Fed head, told Lair NewsHour, I'm sure you've seen the clip, Bill, that we are above the law. No branch of government can touch us. We can do whatever we want. I mean, you might as well say he's God.
Well, that's what the Bible says, that the borrower shall be servant to the lender. And there are two problems with this the national debt, the interest that's incurred. Number one, it's the interest is compounding and we have to pay it. But number two, equally important, but never talked about, is the control that interest gives people. Also...
We're going to talk about it when we get back. Long segment coming up. We'll get into solutions with Bill Still. No more national debt. We're going to be getting into that now, into the solution area. But you got cut off by the break there, Bill. When we talk about we won't back down, we can't back down. There is no way out except by defeating these people. So to get into solutions, in a nutshell, explain the current monetary system versus what the founders established and your well-researched alternative of government-controlled and transparent fiat for credit to empower the individual to create a level playing field versus the globalist controlled fiat that's only used for them at interest. And then the third way, the gold-silver route. I mean, and people email me and say, well, why do you have Bill Still on and then have Ron Paul on? Well, this is not a cult, ladies and gentlemen. We're here to get you thinking. I have on who I think's interesting. I have on who I think's well-researched. I have different perspectives and different views in complex, multivariate, multifaceted understandings as the lay of the land changes. Like, I've studied history. I like and tend to agree with Bill Still's model that a lot of top economists agree with and is a system the bankers really get angry about, especially with Lincoln. But I know that they're not going to go with that system at this time. So under the current system, gold and silver are going to go up. So it isn't a contradiction that I'm entertaining what he's saying, but also saying gold and silver's great, because look at silver's up 7-8 times what it was 10 years ago. Gold's up more than 400%, 4 times and growing. That's a consequence of what the globalists have done. And Bill's right. The University of Texas, the other big universities, the dictators, the banksters, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, they all hoard gold and silver. They are positioning it where in the future it could be $5,000 for gold and $200 for silver. That's a potential. And yes, I would probably, even as a gold and silver bug at that time, oppose a system that put them back in the driver's seat. But again, reality is very complex. It's not just, well, do you support Ron Paul's model or Bill Still's model? Or I'm here respecting you enough to have a wide spectrum breakdown. Okay, Bill, I want to take a few calls later in the hour, maybe hold you 5 minutes over in the next hour, or maybe even 20 if you can do it before Wayne Madsen comes back in. He's busy doing another radio interview anyways. He's down here visiting us in town with some breaking news. But the toll-free number of folks have questions for you, not long diatribes because we're almost out of time here, but simple questions that you'd like to get answered or complex questions put in a simple way for Bill Still. 1-800-259-9231. We'd love to hear from you. We're just limited on time. 800-259-9231. Now, getting into what the monetary system is currently, the 3 different models that we've discussed, and your system and why you think it's the best system.
Well, first of all, just let me say a couple things that you said a lot of stuff. First of all, QE2 not happening. That's a complete non-starter. QE3 will happen, absolutely. They have no other tricks in their bag. Do we want rich guys in the system? Absolutely, we want rich guys in the system. But the fifth, what we want is a capitalist system. What we don't have is a capitalist system. We have a monopolistic system. The fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto says centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. That's what we have today. That's not what we need. What we need is money created in the public interest without public debt. It's as simple as that. There's 2 things that you have to do to make it happen. Number 1, you forbid further government borrowing. Number 2, you forbid the ability of commercial banks to lend money they don't have. We're not trying to kill banks. We're not trying to kill interest. We need banks. We need people to be able to get interest to risk their capital. That's the capitalist system. But we don't have that system. We have the monopolistic capitalist system. Secondly, Obama's stimulated the economy with about $1.4 trillion. But think about it. The banks that get that money get to multiply that by a factor of 10 or 12. There's only $14 trillion in the American economy. So this $1.4 trillion, when multiplied by 10, makes another $14 trillion. In other words, they've doubled the amount of money in the system. That's for sure inflationary. We just haven't seen the full impact yet. It usually takes about 24 months to work its way through the system. Next, you keep referring to this Jefferson quote. I hate to tell you, but on chapter 32 of my book, I have a whole chapter on fake quotes. I try to clean up some of these quotes. That quote happens to be a fake.
Well, I know that's in debate, but I mean, I've got books that are over 100 years old with not just that quote, but tons of quotes by the founders. I've actually read some of the books written by the founders. That's all they talked about was the private central banks. I mean, that's what Lincoln talked about. That's what Jackson talked about.
Absolutely, but there's no verifiable source on that particular quote. Jefferson said plenty of other stuff similar to it, but not that particular quote.
Well, let's go through some of those quotes.
Well, I'd have to dig them out of the book.
Well, that's why I was at the start of the show saying I did want to go through a few quotes. Because, I mean, the founding of our country mainly dealt with the monetary systems. Jackson, it was all about the monetary system. I mean, Bill, break some of that down, because this fight we're facing has been the fight that we've always been facing in any free society if they're going to have a shot at liberty. You know, when you say, yeah, we want rich guys in free market, this is the opposite. These guys use their monopoly over currency and credit to dominate and shut down their competition.
Right. They make the power pyramid very, very steep. That's the ultimate goal of the New World Order, to have that power pyramid as steep as possible, where it's very tall and not very wide. In other words, very few people hold almost all the power at the top, and the bottom portion, the we the people portion, hold very little power at all. I want to say something else about gold money that I think will make sense to your skeptical audience, and that is, suppose that tomorrow your senator calls up and says, you know what, I've got a secret for you. We've got this gold money bill that's absolutely going to pass Congress in 2 weeks. What would the first thing you do? You'd go out and you'd buy all the gold you could. Well, what do you think the rich guys of the world would do? You know, in other words, they can corner the backing of the money, and thereby your money is no longer in the public interest. It's completely manipulatable. In order for money to be in the public interest, it has to be valueless.
Well, let's go over the system that you developed, how you developed it, obviously proposed by other economists in the past. But here's a quote that I have dug up the provenance on. And by the way, I disagree with you on that, Jefferson. Maybe we can consult. And Bill, you flattered me by naming The Secret of Oz off of your research. The time you were on my show, and you said you heard me say that The Wizard of Oz was all about silver and gold-backed money and the fight against the banks, and you thought it was crazy. Then you went and looked it up and found out it was a famous play. I actually researched that Jefferson quote one time, and there is some providence in it and some letters that have very similar things said, and they believe it comes out of a news article quoting him posthumously shortly after his death, right around the same day that who was the other guy that died on the same day? He was a former president. Yeah, John Adams. But going back to this, what about this quote? I see in the future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption will follow, that the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in the hands of a few and the republic destroyed.
I'm not sure, and I don't want to be quoted, but I think that is also not verifiable. This is according. I did a lot of research on this in the final throes of writing this book, because there are
that's Lincoln.
Out there.
That's Lincoln.
People out there who are using. Yeah, I know. There are some people out there.
Sure, but I mean, did Lincoln issue the greenback? Did Lincoln say no to the bankers? Absolutely. I mean, were there thousands of news articles written about Andrew Jackson? I killed the bank at the Hermitage on his deathbed.
Well, but see, that's not true either. I went to the Hermitage and looked at his tomb. That quote is not there. I made a mistake in the Money Masters.
No, wait, I've been to the Hermitage in Tennessee. I wasn't talking about it being a quote on his grave. He was quoted as telling the people when he died there that I killed the bank. I mean, that was published in the papers.
Yes, that may be true, but I reported in the Money Masters that was on his tomb, and that was not correct. So I'm just trying to clean up some of the stuff because there are people.
So basically, the presidents never fought the banks then in their whole history.
Excuse me?
I'm being sarcastic.
Oh. No, there have been presidents who have fought against them, and that's why the New World Order folks hate the United States so much, because there's an outbreak of anti-New World Order, anti-central bank control every so often, and we're about to see another one.
Well, shifting gears, let's get into what we're basically dealing with here with the monetary choices we have, the ideas you cover in your book versus some of the other ideas that are out there.
Right. Well, the current Republican plan is austerity, just as it is in Great Britain and all the other nations of Europe, that we can reduce spending enough so that we can start to pay down these national debts. And as I pointed out before, that's never going to happen. The Republican plan just isn't even in the ballpark of being able to pay down the national debt, even if that was a good idea, and it's not. You can't fix the problem this way. You have to get out of the debt money system altogether.
And by the way, in the Great Depression, they also cut spending, and that only intensified it.
Okay, well, that's I can't really speak to that.
No, I'm saying I agree with you that in the middle of a depression, when you do cut spending, it obviously only stalls the economy out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, what is a depression by definition? It's less money in circulation. And so cutting more money out of the system is not going to work. What you have to do is cut the debt out of the system, and then the economy would revive immediately.
Now, describe your monetary plan
Sure.
for folks.
Sure. Well, as I said, the first thing, if government can't borrow, then it has to balance its budget and face the political consequences of new spending programs immediately, because it would have to raise taxes to pay for them immediately. Sovereign nations don't have to borrow. Sovereign nations can create. Enforcement, we probably need a constitutional amendment that caps the quantity of money. That was Milton Friedman's suggestion, having it raised only with population. The Chicago plan back in the 1930s offered two alternatives: to tie it to inflation or to tie it to GDP. I think GDP would be more difficult because you can't rely on any government economics numbers at this point. They're cooking all the books. There's no honesty anywhere to be found as far as in economic numbers. But I'd be willing to leave that to a panel of experts above my level to decide that. Secondly, you have to eliminate this ability of the banks to lend money they don't actually have. Now, those are the two federal solutions. There's another solution at the state level that helps states out right away.
State bank?
The Bank of North Dakota model, whereby states can create their own state-chartered bank completely outside of the Federal Reserve System, and thereby they can create their own credit so they don't have to borrow money through bonded indebtedness from the big New York money center banks. This is not a far-out experiment. This has been working in North Dakota for 90 years. That's why North Dakota is the only state with a balanced budget. It has the highest birth rate, all kinds of other good economic numbers coming out of North Dakota, and it's something that every state should employ. And when you see legislative sessions in states start at the beginning of next year, you're going to see several states fight on this.
Well, let's go back here. Some listeners are like, give the government the power to just issue fiat? That's crazy. Well, they've already given it to the private offshore banks.
That's exactly right.
And that's why I go back to Lincoln. He tried to get financing for the war, regardless of what your view is on the war out there, listeners. And he couldn't get it at a reasonable rate, so he just issued his own currency. Give folks a history lesson.
Well, right. We've gone to this every time our backs were to the wall. For example, in colonial America, there was not much gold and silver. So the only way these economies got off the ground were individual states printing their own currency, individual banks and states printing their own currency. But the problem was that no one knew how much each state was printing, and so it was a very difficult system. So when they nationalized it with the continental currency, the state system effective that the British government outlawed it and put us all on a gold-only money system, and that caused, as it always does, an immediate depression, and according to Franklin, that was the root cause of the Revolutionary War. Then when we actually were engaged in the Revolutionary War, we had a national money called the Continentals, and of course people point to this as being the Weimar Republic of the revolutionary America, but such was not the case at all. All you have to do is control the quantity. Congress controlled the quantity of issuance of Continentals very well. It was the British parked 2 counterfeiting ships in Boston Harbor, and they counterfeited the currency massively, and this is very well documented.
Because they understand how important monetary systems are. For folks that don't know how the globalists are waging economic war on us, look at the 2 British counterfeiting ships flooding the market so the colonies couldn't buy goods.
That's exactly right. All you have to do to make this system work is control the quantity that's issued. That's what all of economics is all about anyway, to create a stable economy. If you create a stable economy, then the economy thrives.
That's right. Money is just the symbol of agreed-upon exchange to grease the skids of the market. But the banksters, they make it king, and they make it out of nothing, and we bow down and give them all our liberty and freedom for it. It's sick. All right, we're going to take about 15, 20 minutes of phone calls the next hour. Then Wayne Madsen's going to be in studio with us again. Bill Still's our guest. Really an amazing work. His new book, No More National Debt. And it deals with an alternate system to the von Mises alternate with a government-issued fiat system. That is what Lincoln did. It is what the Founding Fathers did. For a time. I think this is all open for debate. I'm not in either camp. I want to get rid of the private Federal Reserve and the private banks that are behind it that have engaged in all this fraud. And Bill Still's done a lot of research into this, and there's a lot of major academics like Friedman and others that supported it. People can then also say that, you know, Friedman supported shock doctrine politically, and that the bankers have kind of put this idea out there in case they get publicly exposed. They think they can hand the power to Congress, and then Congress will do favors to certain groups. But if the public is genuinely educated about monetary issues, that won't be possible. But again, we're having a larger debate. Going over some more of these quotes, he did document the provenance of this one. If Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given them to use themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations. Andrew Jackson. And we do know the entire fight has always been against this money power, as we are now witnessing it. How many times did they try to kill Andrew Jackson?
At least twice, if not 3 times. The one where they stuck 2 pistols right in his stomach, literally in his stomach, and both pistols misfired.
That sounds like Providence, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely Providence. Jackson killed the bank so good that they didn't get it back the way they wanted it until 1913. So for about 70 years. So yeah, he was a great hero.
We're going to go to break in a moment and come back and take some calls and talk more about the book. And you're going to dig out some of the bona fide quotes. And to be clear, I was talking to Bill during the break. A lot of these are quotes that come out in parliaments, or they're taken from other quotes, and then if 1 or 2 words get changed over the hundreds of years and they claim they don't have provenance. I have studied the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the debates. I've got old reprints of newspapers from Jackson's time with the cover of him fighting the Hydra of the bankers. I mean, that's what this is all. I mean, what about the fights in 1913 leading up to the Federal Reserve Act? All of the Lindbergh quotes, and I mean, that's all congressional record.
Oh yeah, that's all perfect.
Yeah, so the system, you know, wants to rewrite history. It's kind of like those academics. They had 5 years ago, 6 years ago, one of them got lost his tenure up in Chicago, claiming that the founders weren't into guns and only 10% of Americans in the colonies owned guns, and that the Second Amendment wasn't really what it was meant for. There's a lot of rewriting going on out there, and they throw things up to try to, oh, actually America was anti-gun, and the United States was, always loved the Bank of England. And they love the, banking acts. I mean, that's just not the case.
No, it's not the case at all. In fact, it was the core reason for the American Revolution. Just like anything else, if somebody takes all the money out of your wallet, you're not happy.
But do you agree with my analysis that money is just a symbol of energy that we agree upon to exchange goods, and that the globalists have just turned it into the idol? They've turned it into the energy itself?
Well, be able to control the quantity, and it's not difficult for them to control the quantity of money if that money is made of metal or based on metal. Money has to be valuable.
Bill, your phone was cutting out. Are you on a cordless?
Yeah. I'm not on a cell phone.
No, that's all right. Just we have a radio checklist. We may have you never do speakerphone, you never do cordless, just because they do that. It's the 101. We're going to go over some quotes from his book that have been properly vetted, documented historical quotes, confirmed by the Supreme Court and others. No more national debt. Bill Still's got them, and he breaks down an alternative system to what the Federal Reserve is doing. It's all food for thought. Just getting people thinking about alternatives and having that debate is half the battle. We're going to start taking your phone calls. For Bill Still, will be with us till 20 after, and then Wayne Madsen joins us in studio for the balance of the hour. Have some other important news coming up. 1-800-259-9231. Let's go ahead and talk to Tyrese in Tennessee. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Mr. Still. Alex, I had a couple of things for you. I guess I'll start first with Mr. Steele. If you can explain to me how I would approach the expectations I should place on my representatives and how we should combat this issue with our budget and the monetary things going on. What type of expectations should we be having on our local officials?
If you don't take the money power away from these private banks, nothing will fix anything, and it's designed to reduce us down to total slaves so they can have us as paupers they control by debt. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And all you have to do is read William Jennings Bryan, 1896 Cross of Gold speech, and that's exactly what he says. Unless you fix the money power, no other reforms are possible. So, what they're doing is they're trying to cut $38 billion out of a budget when, in fact, they're still going to go $1.4 trillion into the hole again this year. So that's not a fix. They can't possibly cut the budget enough, even if they start slashing at Medicare and Social Security, because the interest is compounding. You cannot fix this in any way other than by getting out of the Federal Reserve box, getting out of the debt money system, getting into a system where our money is issued in the public interest without debt. That's the only fix.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. And second, Alex, this is for you. I know a big part of our problem as far as trying to get these changes in our government is this unified front that we don't have. And I'd like to share with you, if you allow me, what I've done on my part to try to fix this.
Sure, tell us.
Connection. I actually built an iPhone application, and it's called Patriot Eyes, and it's in the App Store. And I would like for you to look for it and give me your comments on it. And I guess I'll take your response to that off air. Thanks a lot.
Is it called Patriot Eyes?
Patriot Eyes, that's correct.
All right, I'll check it out. Thank you so much, sir. Survival Doc in Missouri. You're on the air with Bill Still.
Hello, Alex. First-time caller, long-time listener. I have a point of disagreement with Bill Still. I agree with most of what he says. I don't agree that we should go back to another fiat monetary system, because if you look at history, every time government has been given the ability to create unlimited amounts of money, they have used that through inflation to tax.
You're right, but in Christ's time and in the Roman times, they can manipulate metal coins as well. That's the problem. Anything can be manipulated. Is that your question or comment for Bill?
Well, yes, but I think it's a lot harder to manipulate gold and silver because they can't be created, and paper money can be created so easily. And I just don't think we can trust government to monitor that.
That's a great point, Bill. What do you say to that?
I understand the point, and that is the basic point of this thing. Can we trust government with the greatest power? And so my question to you is, and of course you said the wrong thing. You said that government's never been able to control the quantity. That's just flat wrong. But if my question to you is, if we're not going to give the greatest power of a sovereign nation to the government, then who are you going to give it to? There's only one alternative. You can't just let it go to the avoid. That's what Hamilton told Washington, and so thereby the Bank of England jumped in and started creating money and started creating.
I tell you what,
debt.
Survival Doc, Bill Still, stay there. Noel, Kyle, you're coming up. We got some of these bona fide quotes as well for you. Stay with us. Monetary researcher, filmmaker, author Bill Still interviewed Milton Friedman, you name it, for the books and videos he's put together. Done a lot of deep research. He believes government should do what Lincoln did, and basically the government should create interest-free money for its own operations. And that we should have free market banks that have reasonable interest but are there to basically supply the economy with credit and at the same time not allow fractional reserve banking where, as Obama has said, they're not going 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 for every dollar in the bank. Now it's 300-to-1, 400-to-1, 500-to-1. That's not even counting the derivatives, another form of financial instrument. So think of the unfair trade advantage that gives them. They're getting 300, 400-to-1 free money. We're paying interest. No way to compete. It's the greatest form of discrimination. We all tend to think of discrimination as black versus white or North versus South or man against woman or things like this. But real discrimination is economic inequity. That's really the system. Now, Survival Doc, you were saying that you disagree with Bill Still and saying that financial fiat has never worked. Governments can't be trusted. And I kind of agreed with you if we talk about Rome or the U.S. or other systems. But there have been smaller cities, islands that have done it successfully for hundreds of years, and I thought that's where Bill was going. I talked to him during the break. That is where he's going. But overall, Bill, I think that Survival Doc, the caller from Missouri, does have a point. History is full of wreckage of governments that have issued their own currencies, but generally they allow the money power to come in and manage it, correct?
Well, that's true, but I mean, there have been outbreaks throughout history outside of the United States. The United States is the greatest example of fighting for the money power that's ever existed in the history of the world because we are the freest nation. The two go hand in hand, but smaller nations have done this successfully. For example, Guernsey off the coast of France, it's actually a British protectorate, found during the middle 1800s themselves in a horrible condition, and that is they had a very small economy, and yet their dikes were breaking down, the seawall was breaking down, they needed a new market, and so but theirs is a great microcosm of what we should be doing, and that is they agreed to just issue a Guernsey pound note and issue enough of them to do the repairs they wanted. And so what all the citizens were basically agreeing is, there's going to be more money in circulation, and so that means that there's going to be more pressure to buy goods, so the price of goods will naturally go up. So they were all agreeing to suffer the inflation equally for the common good. Then once these edifices were built, the central market and the seawalls repaired, then they could tax whatever extra money there was in the system out of existence again. And thereby it was perfectly equal and equitable. The money was being created without debt in the public interest. And on the bigger scale, that's what we need to go to in this country.
Guernsey's European. Is it a British isle?
It's a British isle, but it's very close to the coast of France.
But it's its own little country, isn't it?
It's not a country. I believe it would be called a protectorate under the American system. I don't know exactly what it's called under the British
But it's got
system.
its own government.
Yeah, it's got its own government, and if you go on the Guernsey website, which you can Google right now, you'll see that even though they still produce their own debt-free government-issued money, they control the quantity quite closely. They try to create this steady-state economy, and that's why they're so successful. That's why they only have a 20% income tax, and they have one of the highest standards of living in Europe.
Wow. Yeah, no, I've read quite a bit about Guernsey. Any other points, Survival Doc?
Well, yes, just one other, and that is I think that the value and quantity of money can be controlled without bankers and governments, and that's by allowing the free market to operate. And I believe that's the opinion of Ron Paul. And
yeah, the Austrian economists love to talk about the free market. But you know what? We've had a pretty free market the last 10 years. How's that been working out for us? Not so good. There is no free market.
But it's had government backing. That's how I mean, if the banksters wanted to engage in this fraud and rip people off, that's their civil issue. It's that pirate market with government backing that's allowed all this, Bill.
If you just say we're going to leave it to the free market, then for sure the rich guys club of the world are going to control it because they control the so-called free market. There's no free market on the Dow Jones, the stock exchange. It's just a bunch of high-frequency computers trading with each other. There is absolutely no free market. If we had a free market, then we'd be in good shape, but we don't.
All right, Survival Doc, good questions. I want to go through some quotes and then hurry through some more calls for Bill Still with his amazing book, No More National Debt. Bill has a really good perspective, well-researched, and I think it's well worth looking at. But unfortunately, most Americans are still not even having this discussion. And it's this discussion that needs to be had so that we're informed on monetary issues, or no matter what road we go down, it's going to be corrupted. Correct, Bill?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And, you know, one of the most interesting periods that I've never been into before that I get into in the book is during the crash of the 1930s. For example, there was a British professor who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1921 by the name of Frederick Soddy, and he got interested in monetary matters, and he just makes some fantastic quotes, which is this the appropriate time to get into some of that?
Yeah, hit us.
Yeah, well, this is a Soddy quote, for example, in 1933. The fluctuations could be minimized if the government alone had the power to create money and created it in order to maintain a stable price level, which is just what I've been talking about. In order to achieve a government monopoly on the creation of money, it would be necessary to eliminate the money created by banks in the process of making loans. The growing bank failures of the early 30s provided by Knight and others at Chicago with the opportunity to reinstate and redefine the Soddy proposal. Then there's another one. There is something called the Program for Monetary Reform, which is put out in 1939 by Paul Douglas. He was professor of economics at University of Chicago, Irving Fisher of Yale, Frank Graham of Princeton, Earl Hamilton of Duke, Wilfred King of NYU, and Charles Wittersley of Princeton. This plan was endorsed by 80% of the professors of economics during the Depression, the Great Depressionary period. And here's a quote out of this work. They were so right on, it's just unbelievable. If the purpose of money and credit were to discourage the exchange of goods and services, to destroy periodically the wealth produced, to frustrate and trip those who work and save, our present monetary system would seem to be a most effective instrument to that end. They're talking about the Federal Reserve System that was just passed 15 years earlier. They saw it exactly right. So, then they talk about the nations that went off the gold standard. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the nations that went off the gold standard earlier came out of the Depression sooner. And here was their quote: "France was among the last to abandon gold, and she's still suffering from her mistake in waiting so long." So, it's this period of the 30s. There were two. There was the Chicago Plan and the Program for Monetary Reform. These guys saw it exactly right, and thereafter, the Fed system clamped down on professors of economics so that this outbreak of truth would never happen again.
Bill, continue with some more quotes.
Okay. Well, here's another quote out of this Program for Monetary Reform. Our own monetary policy should be directed towards avoiding inflation as well as deflation, and in attaining and maintaining as nearly as possible full production and employment. And that's exactly what we're talking about. All you have to do to have a successful economy is to control the quantity so that so that price levels stay steady. That's the whole purpose of economics. And don't you think that if that's all we have to do to fix this economy, don't you think we could find a half dozen or a handful of good people around the country who would be honest about this and just control the quantity of the U.S. issuing its own debt-free government money? I'll say it again, the last caller, believed the Ron Paul thing, that you have to leave it to the free market and back your money with gold or silver or some other form of commodity. And any time you back it with a commodity, as word got out that this bill was coming to fruition, then people would buy up the commodity. So you're not really, it's in control of the rich guys.
Well, what if you went with silver, though? I mean, certainly we've had gold-backed and silver-backed currency before, and and there were some manipulations that went on and some runs, and it was actually the Federal Reserve that used that unstable part of it as their pretext to sell the Federal Reserve Act.
Well, that was, of course, the theory of William Jennings Bryan in 1896, and the reason was his father was a greenbacker, so he knew greenbacks were the solution, but the Greenback Party had only gotten about 3% in the three previous presidential cycles, so he went with the silver-backed money because silver is being wildcatted, from mines in the West, and so he figured, they wouldn't be able to control it so well. But remember back in the 70s when the Hunt brothers controlled the silver market right at the dawn of electronic trading? I tell some hilarious stories in here about that Hunt brothers episode. So two guys.
Yeah, but that was them cornering it artificially. This is being driven by inflation now.
Well, yeah, but if you made silver the basis of money, the rich guys, in a blink of an eye, could buy it up through their high-frequency trading computers. You can't. Money has to be valueless in order to really be in the public interest.
Yeah, that goes back to the tally sticks and seashells.
That's right.
Well, I think this overall has been a very good discussion, and I'm still researching the Austrian school. I'm researching the schools that you follow, and I know that any alternative to the private banking hegemony that we have now is a change of pace, and it will take the power structure some time to reorganize around the new system. And I get calls on both sides off air angry every time I have Ron Paul on about monetary issues, or I have you on or others saying, why am I giving out different views? And it's because it's a college of ideas. Your book's available at Infowars.com. Everybody should get it. It's No More National Debt by Bill Still. And get it and read it and decide for yourself. It's also an interactive book. And you know what? Stay there, Bill. I've got Wayne Madsen coming in, but I want to talk to you 1 minute on the other side. No More National Debt. You call this the world's first interactive book. We were talking during the break. You were saying this was always household discussion, monetary issues, even in blue collar. People on wagon trains were discussing this hundreds of years ago and right up until 1913. And it's when we forgot about this that the banksters were able to run wild. Bill Still, why do folks need to get No More National Debt?
Well, because we've got to make this a household issue again. The household issue that has to be on the forefront of every federal election from now on has to be the quantity of money. How much money is there in the system? And of course, we can't control that as long as the bankers have control of that. We can only control that if you bring that money power back into Congress and then have an oversight committee who actually controls the issuance of that money from elected state representatives. Now, as far as the hyperscans, this is the first hyperscan-enabled printed book ever. There's almost 100 hyperscans in there. It allows me to link. It allows me to cut the book size in half, essentially, because I can link to supplemental videos. I can show the actual PDF of the original Federal Reserve Act, all by just initializing a free app that goes on your smartphone, or you can type the URL into your desktop computer, so desktop computers won't be left out too.
So it's got a mega expanded bibliography, basically.
Well, it's not just a bibliography. It allows me to update the information. For example, it allows people to interact. Where this fake quote issue is big, and so I want to interact with people who have different information on the fake quotes, and it allows people to interact with me, and so we can improve that as well. It's truly interactive. It's the first book with it. 2 years from now, every book that's printed will have hyperscan QR codes in it. But it was just a fan of The Secret of Oz who holds the patent. He said, "Look, I'm going to give it to you. Here it is."
All right, Bill Still, the book is available at Infowars.com. So are the DVD films. Thank you so much for joining us.